Good afternoon, Mike Winkler here. I thought we would try something a little different in my video series and actually have my smiling face appear in one of these. And I wanted to tell a story that was a little more about that storytelling, a little less about whiteboarding. Okay, fair enough. And I wanted to tell you today about the worst presentation I ever did. We're going to call this one a bad day in support. I used to work for a big support organization for a global company. Great guys, all of that. And I had about 45 minutes in a training day to talk about an upcoming new feature in an existing product. And okay, cool, right? So I put about a dozen bullet points on one slide. Why waste slides? Let's throw it up all there at once. And it was one of these rooms where the slides were projected on a whiteboard that you could write on. Okay, fair enough. And a developer had flown in from across the country to be there for this day of training, which I thought was a little weird, but I didn't think much of it. And my boss at the time, and we're going to call her the Poison Dwarf, also decided she was going to show up for this class, and she was already bitter. She was losing her people from the phone for a full day for training. I'm like, okay, I understand. And in the room, it was friendly. It was guys I'd known for years, and they were interested in the topic, right? Because this was a big product they had to support. Should have been the easiest presentation ever. Everything should have just gone well, right? Okay, so I get up there and I throw up my dozen or so bullet points and I start to talk my way through it. And the developer starts to make these kind of choking cat noises like, what? He says, did I mind if he got up and talked about it for a minute? I'm like, well, if he wants to talk about it a couple of minutes, he flew across the country, sure. Except I had no idea this was one of the crowning pieces of his career was the development of this underlying technology. Starts to scrawl on the whiteboard and go nuts. And writing over my slides and all this, next thing I know, 30 of my 45 minutes is gone. The audience got nothing out of this because they're not crypto guys, right? It's a cool feature. They didn't need to know how the code was written. Okay, so at this point, the Poison Dwarf at the back of the room has seen how much time has gone by and the audience isn't getting things out of it and they're all, looking over at their mobile devices, all of this. And she says, Mike, that's good. Can you teach them how to troubleshoot the feature now? And I'm kind of stunned. And I'm like, I never came to troubleshoot the feature. I'm just telling them about the new thing, right? So Greg, a guy in the audience, good guy I've known for years, asks a question from my slide because the whole audience is read ahead of my slides. And we kind of get back on track, on tempo. So I erase the whiteboard and all this, and the developer's looking at me like I've shot his mother, right? And we go through, and I show off the feature as much as I can in that last few minutes. Okay, great. So over the next week in the hallways, people are asking questions, and I'm telling them about the feature, and I have lunch, and I talk about the points we'd wanted to get to anyway. And okay, we eventually get around to it. My boss calls me in her office and says we lost a whole day, and for some reason this was my fault for my 45-minute session, and her team still couldn't even troubleshoot this new feature that hadn't been written yet because we were still introducing it, and this was somehow my fault, right? So I'm looking at what we could have done better, even in this friendliest of environments, or even in this best of topics. And I came down with what should be an obvious principle, but sometimes isn't. Never present unless everybody in the room agrees on what you're doing. So let's talk about it for a few minutes, the things I learned in my worst presentation ever, right? And let's look at this in terms of lessons learned. Find agreement before you begin. I have been up on stage and found that people had a different plan. They wanted to finish shorter. They wanted something to be punchier. They were very visual learners, and I talked a lot. Always have that conversation, even if it's with people you know well, even if it's people you've presented with before, to say, hey, this is how we did it last Tuesday. Are we doing it again in that way? Hey, that's perfect. And sometimes that's all it is. But if I'd have asked a couple of questions beforehand, I could have avoided a lot of these ambushes, right? Never show something on your screen before you want people to think about it. This is something that I think is super vital, and it's really about, well, I don't want to call them new tools, but the new tools of this century. An awful lot of people use PowerPoint and similar technologies like it's a written page and like we've got a grease pencil and it's 1972. I never show a point on the screen or anything similar until I want it to be in your mind. In the case of worst presentation ever, I had put all the bullet points up, so people were already bored with my content by the time I wrangled control of it back in front of me, had already made assumptions, right? So always keep the things on the screen, the things you want people to have in mind. Be aware of people's agendas, like my Poison Dwarf. Now, I could have talked to the poison dwarf beforehand and said, hey, what do you need out of this? And she could have told me that it was about training, and I could have told her it was, oh, we're far too soon for that, and that's a full day. And we could have pulled the pin from that grenade in her office before it became a full derail of my presentation in front of the room and her being mad at me for most of the rest of time. Okay. Be aware of hidden agendas like the angry developer, right? Hidden agendas are obviously a little more work, but there are cues to them. I had no idea that this guy wanted to show up his encryption, his back-end tech, right? But I should have known something was up because the guy had made such an effort to be at the class. So look for reasons things are a little odd around you. If you want a presentation to go off well, especially an important one, look for the unspoken things said by the people around you. And here's the big one, guys. Really easy to lose an audience, really hard to get them back. Once somebody's eyes dip down into their phone, they take that side conversation, they start to chat, whatever, it is really hard to get them back. So whatever you're presenting, stay punchy, stay on topic, right? I am Mike Winkler, and this has been Just Some Things to Think About.